Broadcasting from Detroit's Cass Corridor, it's the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. Today on the show, we'll start with public safety, where Detroit's homicide count has fallen to its lowest level in decades. We'll look at the work happening before violence occurs.
And a long-promised international bridge nears completion. It raises questions about who benefits when mega projects finally arrive.
Then we turn to the healing forces of art. Detroiters are transforming loss from immigration enforcement into public memorials.
And museums are pushing back against political pressure by holding space for truth, memory, and dialogue.
2 hours about how cities reckon with harm and how people insist on being seen. This is the Metro.
We begin with a statistic garnering a lot of attention right now. Detroit ended last year with fewer people killed than it's seen in decades. 165 homicides. That number still carries an enormous amount of grief, but it's also a sharp turn from where the city was just a few years ago, when violence rose alongside deep disruption, loss, and instability wrought by the pandemic. Whenever numbers like this drop, there's a rush to explain them, to credit a program or a policy or a personality. But behind the statistics are hushed forces: housing stability, courtrooms, community trust, the slow work of keeping people from falling through cracks most of us never see. Today, I'm joined by Nancy A. Parker, Executive Director of the Detroit Justice Center. Her organization has been working for years in the background of Detroit's public safety story, often far from patrol cars and police tape. I wanted to talk with her about what this decline really means, what made it possible, and how fragile it might be. Nancy, welcome.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me.
Nancy, before we get into your work at the Detroit Justice Center, I want to think more deeply about the people and the numbers. When the city released this preliminary data showing a significant drop in homicides and shootings, I'm wondering, what was your first reaction as someone who works so close to the harm itself?
Immediately, my mind goes to all the work of all the on-the-ground folks, organizations, mom and pop, folks whose name you and I actually will never know, but understanding that the way that we reduce crime is by meeting people's needs, full stop. I will never believe, and I don't believe that you can point to any statistics that'll show that increasing police budget, increasing technology, increasing surveillance is going to reduce homicide and crime, right? These things occur in our society when there is a deficit, when folks are deprived of something, when there is a need that cannot be met, folks will then go to survival mode. And what we see is violence and harm in our communities. However, it honestly is not rocket science to make the connection that when you actually resource people, when you provide for them, when you take care of their basic needs, that we will see a decline in the violence and the crime in the city. And I believe that, post Black Lives Matter and really just a greater attention on community care and truly community safety as opposed to policing, we have seen a plethora of ways that people are getting held and resourced and, mutual aid supporting people. And that is how we address the root causes that actually lead to those statistics. So to answer the question directly, hearing those stats, I was excited because I knew that it's the painstaking, shiny work of everyday people meeting people's needs in community.
I want to go back to some of the things that you mentioned that it sounds like you feel to be reactionary, which is more policing, more technology, more surveillance. And yet surveillance and closing in on investigations of homicides are proving to lower crime. And there are quite a lot of people who tend to like these things. So, what do you say to folks both in and around Detroit who approve of these police tactics?
Well, in this conversation, I always name that it's almost a false option or empty question because the majority of individuals know nothing else.
Yeah.
They only know our mechanism of policing, and they have been told that this is what is keeping us safe. And so, if you only know one thing, how in the world can we expect you to advocate for something else? That makes no sense. So, if folks and everyone, every human being innately wants to be safe, that by and large is what everybody wants. Therefore, if I'm told the only road or mechanism to said safety is through our police state, I will absolutely be advocating for more police, more cameras, more surveillance, because that is what I think, and I have been led in my how many years on this earth to believe will keep us safe. Of course, there can be a correlation. Specifically, I always see data that matches property crime, right? So whether it's destruction of property or folks loitering in a gas station parking lot that has a green light camera or whatever the case may be, there will absolutely be a decrease in property crimes when folks know that you were watching and looking at them. However, these are always will be reactionary tools, right? As opposed to how can we prevent the crime to occur in the first place that necessitates you to then have to use your surveillance tools. And so, I mean, because it is so proliferates in our community of the green lights and the facial recognition and all these different tech tools, there sure as heck better be some decrease, or else people truly should be rioting in the streets. If we are spending millions of dollars and seeing zero correlation, I would assume someone would lose their job, right? So there has to be some quote unquote benefit or decrease to this oversaturation of surveilling human beings. But what is lost in that is the deprivation of civil rights, civil liberties, freedom to move around. Folks want to be secured. You want to be seen by your neighbors. You don't want to be surveilled by cameras.
And this is a slippery slope, as we
different
know. This is a slippery slope when we talk about the erosion of civil rights. And certainly we're seeing this right now happening in Minneapolis at the hands of federal immigration officers. Nancy, you're talking about some massive unlearning that you want people to do in terms of what they know and instead thinking more deeply about not being reactionary and instead being preventative. How far do you think we've come as a society in getting to that point, in unlearning the idea that that police are central to preventing crime?
I love this question because our society, our country is steeped and honestly baked with state violence at the core of it. And centuries and decades and different permutations of what it looks like, it's still the same. And so to go from centuries of one type of machine and think or expect folks to just shut it off immediately is that's unrealistic, right? And so we are doing long work. We're doing long-term work to get people to start asking deeper questions and thinking critically. I have to absolutely big up and shout out all the young folks that flooded the streets of Detroit. Shout out to Detroit Will Breathe, folks at General Baker Institute, Safety Sundays, everyone in Detroit, and of course, writ large across the country during the summer of 2020 with the execution of, Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, where folks were finally starting to wake up, where folks were finally starting to say, hey, the casualties that we have been told to accept, yes, there will always be some life lost, and you just have to deal with that. Folks finally started to push back and say, hey, maybe that doesn't have to be the way. And we know there was all this rhetoric and conversation about should folks be shouting defund the police and abolish the police, and this is so polarizing. But what I will say at the end of the day, every single time, is that started a conversation that Black radical feminists like the great, Dr. Angela Davis have been trying to have for decades and felt that they were not on the grand stage. It was only when we had, the BLM and people saying defund and abolish, did I really actually see people engaging in principled struggle. And it was honestly like invigorating and exciting.
Can we talk about the factors, the unique factors of that moment, though, Nancy, and whether you think that we might see another moment like that? Because I've recently been talking about this a lot with colleagues. The fact that 2020 was such an anomalous moment. Everything was shut down. There was no professional sports, no theaters, no places to go, so few distractions. People were sitting at home and they were confronted with something terrible. They were confronted with murder at the hands of police. They were seeing these images. They were sitting at home and simmering over this. And the pot boiled over. Do you think there can be another moment like that, given the amount of distractions and the fact that it is a luxury to go out and protest? Some folks are just trying to survive, right? And getting out in the streets that's a luxury.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So I'll start by saying 2020 definitely was a confluence of events and timing that no one could have predicted, and that resulted in everyone's eyes looking and seeing the same things and having the ability to step out. I don't believe, nor do I actually desire for another moment like that, because let's be real, those moments are so monumentous because they come at the length of great depravity of life, loss of limb, right? People are dying in order to have that combustible moment. My hope and what I see and what is giving us, excitement for this moment is that everything is carrying over. So we won't have another 2020, but we are in a non-precedented time right now in 2026, where folks who maybe they had no reason to care about the plight of Black liberation, or those who are getting continuously swept up in this mass incarceration system, can say at the bare minimum, well, that doesn't seem right for a mom to get shot in the face when she's driving away. Right? Yeah. For someone to say, well, you're picking up 3 students at Western High and 1 graduate who are just trying to live their life, right? So what is happening is that moment allowed the ground to be tilled, for the soil now to be ripe, for folks to open their eyes to more things, more than just DPD executing someone on the west side of Detroit, but you can now start to say, wait, what about due process? I may not agree with this person's politics, but I can agree that there is a ridiculous overreach, as well as this is a time where folks are losing SNAP benefits, right? Folks can't eat. We're cutting all of these social measures, RX kids, like, there are things happening that if you were not in the group that was directly affected before, the overreach is so broad now that I truly believe that it is doing a similar justice in bringing more people into the movement and opening the eyes of how this system singularly is meant to protect that 1% and those wealthy folks at the top.
Nancy, I do want to get into your work specifically, but I want to quickly respond to what you're saying right now. And that is that what happened in 2020 with the murder of George Floyd and countless other Black and brown
Correct.
folks that came to the forefront, that has created a new generation of civically engaged people who are doing things like protesting and taking to the streets, that there have been strong residuals from that. And that is what you're seeing now as you think back less than 5 to 6 years ago.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And one last thing I'll say is, although we saw a lot of youth, and even when we do programmings, we hear like, we can't vote just yet. Is there anything else we can be doing?
Wow.
And I name that to say, when these swaths of young folks are of voting age, look out. Truly look out, because you will see the change that everyone is shouting for in the streets.
Let's put some shine now on the Detroit Justice Center, if we could here, because I realize that the work that you're doing there is rarely getting labeled as public safety. We're talking about housing court. We're talking about eviction defense. We're talking about something called movement lawyering, which is a way of practicing law that treats legal work as one tool inside a much larger fight for social change rather than as the center of it. How do you
That's right.
explain to people that this work is connected to whether someone, say, gets shot or not?
Absolutely. And so how we talk about our work at the Detroit Justice Center is that we are a nonprofit law firm and we work alongside communities. And what we are doing is that we are doing the root cause work. We're doing that underlying, honestly, not sexy work where I can't come to you and say, hey, the Metro, look at this picture of all these guns that we took off the street.
Right.
Look at all these things that you can tangibly count.
Those sexy photos and images, right?
Exactly. It's not going to look like that. It's going to be the hard work of being in community and not putting the law on a higher pedestal than those who are directly living the everyday experience and either going to work, trying to pay these high DTE bills, the high insurance to drive in the city, but they need support. And when we talk about the movement, we are talking about the movement for liberation, Black liberation, the movement to free all oppressed people. And that includes everyone. And so at DJC, we are, as you named, we are talking about land use, we're talking about workforce, we're talking about housing, and we're talking about the criminal justice system. We operate under a three-pronged approach. We have defense, offense, and dreaming, and we believe you need all three in order to reach that systemic change. The defensive prong, average numbers, we serve hundreds of clients, and we're in traffic court. We lift and clear over 50 warrants a year. We serve hundreds of folks. We relieve over $75,000 in fines and fees debt. Court debt is a driver to not only incarceration in jails, but also your whole life being upended. Right. If you have outstanding fines and fees, and then you have a bench warrant, and then you get pulled over, you are now going to be incarcerated. 1 day in jail, you can lose your job. You could even lose your kids, right? And so what we are doing is we are removing the debt that people are making the choice of, do I pay the court or do I pay for food? We are clearing warrants. We're getting people back their licenses so people can actually drive legally. Like I said, throughout the whole spectrum of that, what we call defensive work, we can see over 500 folks that come through our door. We work with great referral partners around the city. Detroit Life is Valuable Every Day. D-Live is an amazing hospital intervention program that we work and train cohorts of people. We have a 100% success rate in those cohorts of folks not going back to the ER for gunshot, stab wounds. They're on their way to getting jobs and supporting their families.
So,
This is
Nancy, this
truly
is
transformational work.
I mean, it sounds like it. What you're saying is that you are a barrier to those cracks that people fall through in the system and are never able to climb out of. This is The Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent. My guest is Nancy A. Parker, Executive Director of the Detroit Justice Center. We're talking about Detroit's recent decline in violent crime and the quieter, less visible work that helps make those numbers possible. Nancy, could you walk us through a moment? I'm thinking one case, one person, one neighborhood where an intervention that had nothing to do with policing clearly prevented something worse from happening.
Man, there's so many stories, Robin, that span the spectrum. A couple jump out at me. First, if you go on the housing tip, we do eviction defense, but we also do other issues of housing in terms of a land contract dispute. And keeping people in their homes is vitally important to safety. If folks have no safe place to come home and live, where do you think they're roaming? We had a client who was a single mom, had young children in her family, and was living in a situation that was completely untenable, but the landlord was refusing to fix the housing, to fix the leaks and provide running water. And this woman is in a dire, precarious situation where she has to make a choice of how am I going to live and how am I going to get food and money for my children. And it's not hyperbole. It's not anecdotal. It's truly real people's lives where they say, if this doesn't work out, I don't know what I'm going to do. And Robin, when someone looks you in the face and says, I don't know what I'm going to do, that usually means that they're going to resort to some unsavory ends.
Out of desperation.
Clearly, desperation is always at the heart. What we were able to do was file some legal, you could call it a lawsuit, sanctions against the landlord saying, hey, the landlord hasn't done this. This is a violation of the habitability requirements. They don't have their codes. And we just kept coming them with our legal tactics of a fine for this, to the point where the landlord was just like, okay, I am out of state. I'm not even here. And this is going to take too much for us to fix this. I would rather do a sale. I would rather do a turnover sale, work with an intermediary in DJC to allow this Black single mom to become a first-time home buyer. And we will actually work towards fixing up the house, because a lot of money goes into folks who are renting, pouring money into a place that they don't actually own. And here we were able to connect her with other housing advocates, get her stable, get her children stable. And that is someone whose life was not upended. Similarly, when we work with folks on the traffic end, what we're able to do is get people jobs. We have referral partners with the Center for Employment Opportunity, CEO, for STIR Metro, for the Family Assistance Renaissance Man Program, Farm, United Way, all of these other places, right? And I had a client who came home from incarceration, was in that Trying to Be a Better Father program, had over $75,000 worth of debt, which in prison, we have slavery. We have free labor in prison. I think he may have been getting paid maybe 5 cents for the work that he was doing.
And that's not uncommon.
Across the country, it's not uncommon, right? This is codified in not only the United States Constitution, but in state constitutions that says if you are convicted of a crime, we are allowed to have free labor. And so you come home in debt and having a felony record, and we know the barriers to employment and housing. I was able to mount a novel due process argument to really cut that fines and fees, the $75,000 that this man is like, Nancy, first I'm struggling to get a job, and now I have to pay this, and I'm also supposed to meet all of these requirements. This is not tenable for me. And so we were able to get all those fines and fees reduced almost in half, get it to a payment plan that he could afford. He was able to get his license, and then he was able to get a job delivering. It wasn't, I don't believe it was Amazon, but as a truck driver, like doing deliveries, right? And so this is someone who previously needed to take care of his kids and his family, so was selling drugs and admits that, right? But he served his time. And we have this saying that if you do the crime, do the time, and then come back, yet we put all these barriers in place. And when I tell you, working with that client, how he was now almost triggered to join this movement that he never saw himself a part of, but he saw the inequities of, I did my time, but now there are all these barriers in place. It seems like it's set up for me to fail and go right back in to selling drugs and going back to the people that I was on the corner with.
Sure.
And instead, because he's working with these other community organizations in the city that referred him to DJC, we were able to set him on a path that was nowhere near why he did those 15 years.
But he couldn't do it alone.
This is the work of safety.
Yeah, he couldn't do it alone. My guest is Nancy A. Parker, Executive Director of the Detroit Justice Center. We've been talking about Detroit's recent decline in violent crime and the quieter, less visible work that helps make those numbers possible. We'll be right back. On WDET. I'm Robin Vincent. We're talking about Detroit's homicide numbers, which are the lowest since the 1960s. But how much credit should go to the work of police, and how much to community organizations that are working to prevent crime before it begins? My guest is Nancy A. Parker. She's Executive Director of the Detroit Justice Center. Nancy, we were briefly talking about guns at one point, and so much of Detroit's violence is gun violence. And for that reason, there are a lot of people who say that this should be more so the work of the police. What do you say in response to that?
So my response, and Robin, let me name, because I don't think I have identified myself fully yet. I am a believer in abolition. I am a practicing abolitionist. The Detroit Justice Center is an abolitionist organization.
Nancy, do you want to? Yes, please explain for folks.
Absolutely, Robin. When I say that, I know folks are thinking, slavery, what is she talking about, right? No, we are talking about prison industrial complex abolition, PIC abolition. And what that big word means is that we are working towards a society where we are no longer reliant on incarceration of any form, including ICE detention centers, jails, prisons, juvenile justice centers, like anything that cages a human being, nor are we interested in a future that relies on the police state. So policing as an entity, as we know it. This includes surveillance and traffic stops as they currently look in its formation. As an abolitionist living in the year of 2026, I can tell you that there is no need for folks to fret or be afraid that Nancy is talking about just snapping her fingers and unlocking every cell and letting everyone out. Quite to the contrary. I am talking about creating the container where none of that will be needed. And we are creating that container right now. So I preface by saying, if it is the job, if folks believe and we want to continue having police do what The majority of folks believe that they do. And I say that in turn intentionally, what the police purport to do. People, if that's what they think, okay, have them continue to do that while we build this up. But if we are tasked with keeping folks safe, and it's always like, hey, Nancy, but you guys are abolitionists and this murder happened. Why didn't you do anything about it? We don't have the resources, Robin. We have to start with equity in the coffers before we can start looking at apples to apples, or honestly, even oranges to apples. The police and the whole institution is $1 billion industry. And they primarily are not addressing violent crime, nor are they clearly being proactive. We know they're reactive and reactionary. They're doing traffic enforcement. They're doing property crime call out. We see them abusing protesters in the street. This is how folks' tax dollars are being deployed. It is not to close and solve homicide rates and prevent this alleged murderer from being on the rampage.
But Nancy, if I
are,
could jump in,
yes,
just because we are running out of time here. I mean, this is a delicate matter because we know that there are Detroiters who want police presence in their neighborhoods, that they do trust the police. What do you say to those folks? And I realize you're not advocating for a full eradication of the police, but we are talking about some of the ways that police fall short when it comes to the decreases in violent crime that are being celebrated right now.
Absolutely. What I will say is we are working towards that eradication of the police, again, in a way that we don't need them. And so what I directly respond with is, what if I can tell you that we can have community members, right? Individuals who are doing the work of keeping neighborhoods drug-free, gun-free, and safe without the threat of the terror of someone who has been military trained, who is telling you that we are trained to kill. I agree. We need people in communities checking on one another, making sure there's not retaliatory, gang actions or whatever. But I can point to a group like Detroit Hispanic Corporation, DHDC, who does that work, and they are not police,
Right.
and they don't have any casualties
They're
of shooting people. Right?
they're embedded in the community. Community members
Correct.
trust them. We are unfortunately almost to the end here, and so in the last minute or so that we have, I do want to try and tie things up. Earlier in the conversation, you mentioned that this will be a long process to moving to a place where we're not hyper surveilling each other, and specifically Black communities.
Yes.
Do you think we're moving closer, if slowly, toward that world where we look at approaching safety that doesn't include the police?
Absolutely. I honestly would not be here in this seat talking to you if I did not believe that. I have 2 little girls, and I have unending hope because we will do this. My ancestors were enslaved at one point in time, and I'm sure the conditions in that moment, there were many naysayers that said there's no way out. And that is what I tell folks today. We are in a long, slow dredge, but we will get out of these trenches to a time and place where our generations to come and our grandkids are not grappling with the same things, because we've actually resourced communities with clean water, healthy foods, education, healthcare, mental health resources, housing. Robin, we didn't even talk about the lack of affordable housing and what we can actually do as a community for community-led development, right? There are so many ways. There are literally a million ways that we can take care of one another and keep each other safe. And that is so exciting to me. And I know we will get there. We're doing it at DJC. There are many other organizations and individuals doing the same things. And we absolutely will get there. There's no reason to be defeatist or to give up hope. Instead, this is the time to double down on what can I do? Who can I pour into? How can I volunteer with DJC? Where can I send my dollars to DJC and other organizations of the like, so that we can be talking about this as a blip in our history, as opposed to a moment in time where no one did anything?
Attorney Nancy Parker is Executive Director of the Detroit Justice Center. Nancy, thank you for your time and your work.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the time.
It's the Metro on WDET. Coming up, the Gordie Howe International Bridge is expected to open any day now. How will the new international crossing affect residents who live in its shadow? We'll find out next. Stay with us here on the Metro.